Whispers of the wind. The earth was still soft where Thomas lay. Sarah knelt, pulling a stubborn weed that had dared to sprout on his grave. Its roots clung tenaciously, mirroring the grief that still held her captive. The headstone, a simple piece of granite she'd managed to haul from the creek bed, bore his name and the dates of his too short life. She traced the carved letters with a calloused finger, the cold stone a stark contrast to the warmth she remembered in his hand. "Miss you, Pa," she whispered, her voice cracking. The wind, a constant companion on the prairie, seemed to catch the words and carry them away, mocking her solitude. She'd planted wildflowers around the grave, bluebells and Indian paintbrush, his favorites. They struggled in the dry soil, much like she did. The farm was failing. The well had nearly dried up. The corn stalks were stunted and brown, and the relentless sun beat down on everything, sucking the life out of it. Thomas had known how to coax the land, to read its subtle signs. She only knew how to work, and working wasn't enough. She rose, brushing dirt from her worn skirt. Billy and Mary were down by the creek, their laughter faint but comforting in the vast emptiness. She needed to be strong for them. They were all that mattered now. Down by the creek, Billy, all elbows and knees, was trying to dam the flow with mud and stones. Mary, her blonde pigtails bouncing, chased after dragonflies with a tattered net. The air hummed with the drone of insects and the gurgling of the water. "Billy, look!" Mary squealed, pointing to a flash of blue darting among the reeds. Billy abandoned his dam and scrambled after her. "I almost got it," he cried, lunging with his hands. They chased the dragonfly further down the creek, their laughter echoing against the cottonwood trees that lined the bank. As they rounded a bend, the sound changed, morphing into something else. A low, mournful hum, almost like a sigh, carried on the breeze. Billy stopped, his brow furrowed. "Did you hear that, Mary?" Mary, still clutching her net, listened. "Hear what?" "Just the wind." "No, it's different," Billy insisted. "It's singing." He stepped closer to the creek bank, peering into the dense foliage. The sound seemed to be coming from the far side, from the deep shadows where the trees grew thickest. It wasn't the wind, it was something else. Something unsettling. "Maybe it's an animal," Mary suggested, her voice hushed. Billy shook his head. "I don't know. I've never heard anything like it before." He grabbed a rock, hefting it in his hand. "Stay here, Mary." Mary hesitated, then nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Billy crept along the bank, his senses on high alert. The humming grew louder, more distinct. It was a sound filled with sorrow, a lament carried on the wind. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Back at the farmhouse, Sarah stood on the porch, her gaze sweeping across the parched fields. The wind whipped her hair around her face, carrying with it the scent of dust and dying vegetation. The silence, usually a comfort, now felt oppressive, heavy with a sense of foreboding. She was so far from anyone, so utterly alone. The nearest neighbor was a day's ride away, and they rarely saw anyone else. A hawk circled overhead, its sharp cry piercing the stillness. Sarah shivered despite the heat. She hadn't felt this uneasy since Thomas had taken sick. She shielded her eyes, searching for Billy and Mary. They should have been back by now. The shadows were lengthening, and the air was growing cooler. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. She scanned the horizon, her heart pounding. Nothing but endless prairie stretching out to the distant blue hills. The silence pressed in on her, broken only by the whispers of the wind. And in those whispers she heard a warning. A stranger by the creek. The creek murmured a somber tune, a low harmony against the cicadas' shrill chorus. Billy, a twig his only tool, listlessly stirred a muddy patch. Mary, balanced on a boulder draped with moss, skimmed stones across the water's surface, her usual bright spirit subdued by the sweltering air. Their task, gathering watercress. But the atmosphere lay thick, pregnant with an unsettling quiet, not of peace, but anticipation. "Did you hear it again?" Billy breathed, his voice a bare thread. Mary stilled, her fingers poised above her dwindling pile of pebbles. The drone of cicadas persisted, the creek still babbled, but beneath it, a deep, resonant groan seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. It was fainter than the day before, diminished, yet undeniably present. A shard of fear, sharp and icy, pierced the summer's languor. Billy let his twig fall. Mary's remaining stones tumbled from her grasp. They shared a look, a silent language spoken only by siblings who had tasted heartbreak. "Let's go," Billy urged, and they ventured upstream, pushing through the dense foliage along the creek's edge. The groan intensified, guiding them toward a small haven veiled by weeping willows. There, prostrate, lay a man. His skin was bronzed, his long, raven hair matted with leaves and loam. His chest fluttered with shallow, uneven breaths. An arrow jutted from his flank, its feathers stained dark with dried blood. A Comanche. Billy recognized it instantly, the intricate artistry of the beads on his moccasins, the hawk's feather braided into his hair. This wasn't some wayward settler, this was a warrior. Mary gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Billy, despite the tremor of fear, felt a jolt of adrenaline. He knelt warily, his gaze sweeping the clearing, half expecting others to materialize. But only the injured man, the relentless insects, and the silent sentinels of trees were present. The man's eyelids fluttered open. He turned his head slightly, his dark eyes, glazed with suffering, locking onto Billy. A spark, defiance, perhaps, flickered within their depths. He attempted to speak, but only a guttural rasp escaped his throat. Billy, forgetting his trepidation, extended a hand. He's hurt bad, Mary. Real bad. The man's gaze drifted to Mary and a shudder racked his frame. He closed his eyes once more, his breathing becoming even more labored. We need Mama, Mary whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf. He's going to die. Billy sprang to his feet, pulling Mary up with him. Come on. Run. They bolted from the clearing, tearing through the tangled undergrowth, their terror fueling them. Thorns clawed at their clothes, brambles tore at their skin, but they pressed on, unyielding. The image of the wounded Comanche, his face etched with pain and resolve, seared itself into their memories. They burst from the woods and into the farmyard, breathless and frantic. The chickens scattered, squawking their displeasure. Sarah, her face a mask of fatigue, was hanging laundry on the line. Mama! Mama! Billy cried, his chest heaving like a bellows. Sarah turned, her brow creasing with worry. What is it? What's wrong? A man. Mary gasped, pointing toward the creek. By the creek. Injured. Comanche. Sarah's color vanished. The blood drained from her face, leaving her complexion ashen. The word Comanche hung in the air, laden with unspoken terror. She knew its implications, its potential consequences, raids, brutality, death. Yet she also witnessed the raw fear in her children's eyes, their genuine anguish. She remembered Thomas lying still beneath the earth. She thought of the crushing loneliness that had enveloped her since his passing, the sense of utter vulnerability in a merciless world. A decision, abrupt and resolute, solidified within her. It was a perilous decision, an audacious one, but it was hers to make. Show me, she commanded, her voice surprisingly firm. Show me where he is. A leap of faith. The sun beat down on Sarah's neck, each drop of sweat a tiny testament to her fear. The Comanche lay still, his breathing shallow and ragged. Flies buzzed around the open gash on his shoulder, a grim invitation to infection. Mary clung to Sarah's skirt, her small body trembling. Billy, braver, perhaps out of youthful ignorance, stood his ground, his eyes wide with curiosity. Sarah knelt, the rough fabric of her skirt scratching against her skin. She reached out a hesitant hand, then pulled back. This was madness. He was Comanche. A raider, perhaps. Her neighbors, the whole county, would condemn her if they knew. But the man's face, even bruised and streaked with dirt, held a stark vulnerability. He looked lost. She swallowed, the lump in her throat thick with conflicting emotions. Her gaze fell on the blood seeping into the parched earth, staining the ground a dark, ominous red. It was then she noticed the unnatural angle of his left leg, obviously broken. He wouldn't survive long out here. With a deep breath, Sarah touched his forehead. He was burning up. Closing her eyes, she whispered a prayer, the words a fragile shield against the storm of uncertainty brewing inside her. Lord, guide my hand. Show me the righteous path. Forgive me if I err. Images flashed through her mind. Her wedding day, the church filled with hymns and promises, her husband, Thomas, reading from the Bible, his voice strong and filled with conviction. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The words echoed in her memory, a stark counterpoint to the fear gnawing at her. She opened her eyes, her decision made. Fear hadn't vanished, but it was now laced with a steely resolve. She couldn't leave him to die. Not out here, alone. Not when she had the power to help. Billy, she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. Go back to the house. Get the wagon and some blankets. Hurry now. Billy, startled by her tone, obeyed without question, his small legs churning as he raced across the field. Mary remained, still clinging to Sarah, her eyes wide with fright. It's all right, darlin', Sarah murmured, stroking Mary's hair. We're going to help him. She knew the coming days would be fraught with peril. Questions, suspicions, and the very real danger of retaliation should his tribe come looking for him. But she couldn't turn her back on a fellow human being in need. Walks with Stars moaned, a low guttural sound that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. His eyes flickered open, dark and unfathomable, locking onto hers. He tried to sit up, a grimace of pain contorting his features. "Lie still," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. "You're hurt." He stared at her, his gaze unwavering, assessing. There was no gratitude in his eyes, no pleading. Only a quiet, watchful intensity that made her uneasy. When Billy returned with the wagon, Sarah directed him to help her lift the warrior. It was a struggle, his body heavy and unyielding. Finally, they managed to get him onto the wagon bed, arranging the blankets to cushion his injured leg. Sarah climbed onto the driver's seat, took a deep breath, and flicked the reins. The wagon lurched forward, beginning the slow, arduous journey back to the farm. Each bump and jolt sent a wave of pain through the Comanche, and Sarah winced in sympathy, praying she was doing the right thing. She glanced back at him, his eyes closed now, his face etched with pain. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Life on the McKinley farm would never be the same. Shelter in the barn. The weight of Walks with Stars was a brutal reminder of Sarah's own limitations. Each step was a grunt, a prayer, a silent plea to the Almighty for strength. Thomas, bless his heart, strained alongside her, his small frame practically disappearing beneath the warrior's arm. Mary, clinging to Sarah's skirt, watched with wide, frightened eyes, the silence broken only by the rustle of dry grass and their labored breaths. The barn loomed ahead, a shadowed rectangle against the fading light. Its weathered wood, usually a comfort, now seemed to press in, a symbol of the secrets it would hold. Sarah wrestled open the heavy door, the hinges screaming in protest, and the musty scent of hay and earth filled the air. "Easy now," she grunted, guiding Walks with Stars towards a pile of loose hay in the corner. They managed to lower him, his body a dead weight against their combined efforts. He lay still, his face pale in the dim light filtering through the cracks in the barn walls. Sarah knelt beside him, her hands trembling slightly. She ripped a strip of clean cloth from her petticoat, ignoring Mary's gasp of dismay. It would have to do. She dipped the makeshift bandage into a bucket of water, wincing at its grimy appearance. It was the best she had. "Thomas, fetch the lantern," she instructed, her voice tight. The lantern cast long, dancing shadows across the barn, illuminating the grim task ahead. Sarah gently began to clean the wound on Walks with Stars' side. It was deep, ugly, and festering, a testament to the days he'd spent untended. He didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, but Sarah saw the flicker of pain in his dark eyes. Mary crept closer, her fear battling her curiosity. She peered at the wound, her small face etched with concern. "Will he be all right, Mama?" "I don't know, darlin'," Sarah admitted, her voice low. "But we're going to do everything we can to help him." She cleaned the wound as best she could, her brow furrowed in concentration. The air hung thick with the metallic scent of blood and the earthy smell of the barn. Each careful movement was a gamble, a risk that could expose them all. Thomas, usually so quick to chatter, stood silently, his eyes fixed on Walks with Stars. He seemed to absorb the scene, the weight of it settling on his young shoulders. He had seen death before, but never so close, so immediate. Sarah finished bandaging the wound, her fingers clumsy with fatigue. She looked at Walks with Stars, his face still and drawn. He hadn't spoken a word, hadn't offered a single complaint. His stoicism was unnerving, a wall that she couldn't seem to penetrate. "We need more water," she said, breaking the silence. "And something for him to eat." The meager supplies in the farmhouse suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. Flour, beans, some dried meat, barely enough to feed her own family, let alone a grown man who was clearly starving. A wave of doubt washed over her. Had she made the right decision? Could she really keep him hidden, nurse him back to health, without endangering her children? She looked at their faces, at Mary's wide-eyed concern and Thomas's quiet resolve. They were watching her, waiting for her to lead. She couldn't falter now. "Thomas, you stay here with Mary," she said, her voice firm. "I'll go back to the house and see what I can find." She stood, her knees aching, her back protesting. The barn suddenly felt like a prison, the hay a scratchy, uncomfortable bed. But it was shelter for now, and she would do whatever it took to protect the lives within its walls. The enormity of the task ahead threatened to crush her, but beneath the fear, a flicker of determination ignited. She would find a way. She always did. Eyes that watch. The barn smelled of damp hay and the pungent salve Sarah had concocted. The air hung thick and heavy, mirroring the anxiety that coiled in her gut. She hadn't slept more than a few fitful minutes, haunted by the image of Walks with Stars' feverish face. Thomas and Mary, exhausted, slept curled up in the loft, their innocent trust a burden and a comfort. A low groan sliced through the quiet. Sarah's head snapped up. Walks with Stars stirred, his dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. She rose slowly, her hand instinctively reaching for the small, worn pistol tucked into her apron pocket. His eyelids flickered, then opened, revealing eyes the color of obsidian, deep and unreadable. They roamed the barn, taking in the rough-hewn timbers, the dusty tools hanging on the wall, the faint shafts of sunlight piercing the cracks in the wood. Then they locked onto Sarah. There was no recognition, no gratitude, and certainly no friendliness in that gaze. Only a stark, assessing scrutiny that made her skin crawl. She swallowed, trying to project an air of calm she didn't feel. "You're safe here," she managed, her voice raspy from disuse. He didn't respond, didn't even blink. His eyes remained fixed on her, dissecting her, stripping away her defenses. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. She felt like a rabbit caught in a hawk's stare. Sarah gestured towards the water skin beside him. "Water," she offered, picking it up and holding it out. Walks with Stars' gaze followed the movement of her hand. He remained motionless, his expression unchanging. She edged closer, her heart pounding against her ribs. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Finally, with a slow, deliberate movement, he reached out and took the water skin. His fingers brushed hers, sending a jolt through her. His skin was rough, calloused, yet surprisingly warm. He raised the skin to his lips and drank deeply, his eyes never leaving hers. When he finished, he lowered the skin and let it fall to the ground with a soft thud. Still, he said nothing. The only sound was his ragged breathing. Sarah pointed to his bandaged wound. "Hurt," she said, wincing at the inadequacy of the word. She mimed applying ointment, hoping he would understand. His gaze shifted to the bandage, a flicker of something, perhaps pain, perhaps acknowledgement, crossing his face. He reached up and touched the edge of the linen, his fingers tracing the crude stitches. She took a deep breath and tried another approach. She pointed to herself. "Sarah," she said, enunciating each syllable carefully. "Sarah." He watched her, his expression inscrutable. After a long moment, he seemed to understand. He pointed to himself, then hesitated. Finally, he uttered a single word, a guttural sound that was foreign and unfamiliar. It sounded something like Takeomi. Sarah repeated the sound, stumbling over the unfamiliar syllables. "Takeomi?" she questioned. He didn't correct her, didn't confirm or deny. He simply continued to watch her, his eyes burning into her. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the barn floor. Sarah remained rooted to the spot, locked in an unspoken battle of wills with the wounded Comanche warrior. She knew with a chilling certainty that this was just the beginning. The language barrier was a wall between them, but his eyes spoke volumes. They held a strength, a resilience, and a wildness that both intimidated and intrigued her. They were the eyes of a predator, wounded but still dangerous. And they were watching her. Whispers of disapproval. The whispers began subtly, like wind sifting through brittle reeds before a deluge. Sarah registered furtive glances near Ketchum's mercantile, the sudden stillness that descended when she walked into the chapel. Even Mrs. Henderson, normally garrulous with gardening advice, now veered across the dusty street to avoid her. Initially, she attributed it to lingering pity following her husband's passing, a temporary discomfort time would alleviate. Yet, the feeling intensified, a persistent disquiet that lodged deep within her, a knot of apprehension. Eavesdropped snippets. Comanche depredations. Living amongst us. Inviting trouble. Drifted to her on the breeze. One afternoon, while pegging clothes to the line, she overheard the tail end of a hushed conversation between two women by the well pump. Saw him. Huge as a grizzly. Right there on her property. Their voices dropped to a low murmur and Sarah straightened, her grip tightening on a damp sheet. The rumor swelled, morphing into wild tales. Whispers spoke of pilfered horses, vanishing cattle, a rising anxiety that cast Sarah's empathy as downright perilous. Suspicion, like kudzu, threatened to smother the neighborly spirit she'd always cherished. As dusk bled across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and bruised plum, a group of men materialized near her homestead. They advanced on foot, their silhouettes stark against the waning light, their faces set like granite. She recognized Abernathy, the burly blacksmith, arms crossed over his broad chest. Thomas, her adjacent farmer, and several others whose names she knew, yet whose expressions seemed distant and judgmental. Her children, Caleb and Mary, ceased their games and clung to her skirt, eyes mirroring her growing unease. Walks with Stars, who had been quietly observing the sunset near the barn, stood. He moved with a lithe strength that belied his recent wounds, his dark gaze sharp, calculating the odds. Sarah moved forward, a shield between her children and the advancing figures. "Evening, gentlemen," she offered, her voice even, despite the tremor in her fingers. "What brings you here?" Abernathy stepped forward, his face creased with disapproval. "We've come to inquire, Sarah, about the house guest you're protecting." "House guest?" Sarah parried, affecting ignorance. "Don't feign innocence, Sarah," Thomas retorted, his voice dripping with suspicion. "We all know about the Comanche. The one you're concealing." Sarah's pulse hammered in her throat. "He was hurt," she reasoned, her voice gaining volume. "I couldn't abandon him to die." "Hurt?" Abernathy scoffed. "He's a Comanche. A savage. He'll carve you up the first chance he gets." "He's done nothing to warrant fear," Sarah countered, her gaze sweeping across the group. "He's been nothing but respectful." "Respectful?" Thomas sneered. "They're all cut from the same cloth, Sarah. You're endangering us all. Our families." The air thickened with animosity. Walks with Stars remained still, his presence a silent bulwark. Caleb whimpered, burying his face in the folds of Sarah's dress. Mary fixed the men with wide, frightened eyes. "We're asking you, Sarah," Abernathy pressed, his voice hardening. "Hand him over. We'll deal with him." Sarah held her ground, defiance sparking in her eyes. "He is under my roof," she declared, her voice echoing with newfound resolve. "And I won't violate that trust." An unexpected hand. The morning after the confrontation, Sarah expected Walks with Stars to retreat further into himself, burdened by the animosity he'd witnessed. Instead, she found him outside, examining the dilapidated fence bordering the south pasture. He moved with a stiffness she hadn't seen before, a reminder of the bullet still lodged deep within his shoulder. She approached cautiously, a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. "You shouldn't be out here. You need to rest." He turned, his dark eyes holding a surprising warmth. He gestured towards the fence, a section of which had completely collapsed. "Fence broken? Cattle? Escape?" His English was halting, strained, but his meaning was clear. Sarah sighed. Repairing the fence was on her endless list of chores, one she'd been dreading. "I'll get to it." Walks with Stars picked up a fallen post, testing its weight. "I help." And he did. Slowly, painstakingly, he worked alongside her. Sarah showed him how to set the posts, how to stretch the wire taut. He watched, his brow furrowed in concentration, then mimicked her movements with surprising dexterity. His large hands, calloused and scarred, were gentle as he handled the wire, securing it with a practiced twist. He didn't speak much, but his presence was a comfort, a silent acknowledgement of their shared burden. The rhythmic clang of the hammer against the metal posts filled the air, a counterpoint to the anxiety that had been gnawing at her insides. By midday, a significant portion of the fence was repaired. Sarah's back ached, her hands were blistered, but a sense of accomplishment, a feeling she hadn't experienced since Thomas's passing, warmed her from the inside out. The next day, Billy, usually glued to Sarah's side, began trailing Walks with Stars. Sarah watched from the porch as the Comanche man led the boy into the woods. A wave of unease washed over her, but she forced herself to stay put, trusting, perhaps foolishly, in her instincts. Later, Billy returned, his face flushed with excitement, clutching a handful of feathers and a small, intricately carved wooden animal. "He showed me how to track rabbits, Mama. And deer. He knows all the signs." He chattered about paw prints, scat, and the subtle bending of grass, knowledge imparted with a quiet patience that Sarah had never possessed. Mary, too, was drawn to Walks with Stars. One afternoon, Sarah found them sitting beneath the old oak tree, a circle drawn in the dirt. Walks with Stars was using pebbles to create a game, his dark eyes crinkling at the corners as he explained the rules to Mary. She giggled, her bright eyes sparkling as she moved the pebbles across the dirt. It was a simple game, a child's game, but the sight of their shared laughter, a melody that had been absent from the farm for too long, brought a lump to Sarah's throat. Walks with Stars' presence was changing the dynamic of the farm, softening the edges of their grief, offering a glimpse of something akin to normalcy. He was a stranger, an outsider, yet he seemed to understand them in a way that no one else did. He didn't offer platitudes or empty promises, just a quiet strength, a willingness to share their burdens. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this fragile piece was built on shifting sand. The townsfolk hadn't forgotten her defiance. She saw their accusing glances, heard their whispered comments. The storm was brewing, and she knew it was only a matter of time before it broke. This time, though, she wouldn't be alone. The fury of the storm. The air grew thick and heavy. a suffocating blanket woven with the scent of ozone and damp earth. Sarah paused in her weeding, a prickle of unease crawling up her spine. The sky, moments before a hazy blue, was now a bruised purple, churning with angry clouds. Even the chickens sensed the change, clucking nervously as they huddled beneath the porch. "Storm's comin'," Walks with Stars said, his voice low and steady. He stood by the newly mended fence, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He'd been showing Billy how to properly secure the posts, their earlier laughter now replaced by a shared apprehension. Sarah nodded, her stomach tightening. A storm this late in the season could be devastating. She hurried Mary inside, instructing her to gather candles and blankets. "Billy, help Walks with Stars secure the animals," she called out, her voice sharper than she intended. The first drops of rain were fat and heavy, splattering against the dry earth like miniature explosions. Within minutes, the downpour intensified, transforming the yard into a muddy swamp. The wind howled, rattling the windows and whipping the trees into a frenzy. Sarah watched from the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. Walks with Stars and Billy, their faces plastered with rain, struggled to guide the horses into the barn. The animals, skittish and panicked, resisted their efforts, adding to the chaos. He moved with a fluid grace despite the downpour, calming the animals with soft words. The creek, usually a gentle trickle, began to swell, its muddy waters rising rapidly. Sarah watched in horror as it crept closer to the house, swallowing the lower part of the garden. She knew this creek could turn into a raging river in a matter of hours. "It's rising fast," she yelled to Walks with Stars, her voice barely audible above the roar of the wind and rain. "We need to move the livestock to higher ground." He nodded, his eyes grim. He understood the danger. Together, they battled the elements, herding the cows and pigs toward the small hill behind the barn. The wind tore at their clothes and the rain stung their faces, but they pressed on, driven by a primal instinct to protect their livelihood. Inside, Mary huddled by the fireplace, her face pale. "Mama, I'm scared," she whispered. Sarah pulled her close, trying to project an air of calm she didn't feel. "It'll be all right, honey. We've weathered storms before. But this felt different. This felt malevolent." Suddenly, a deafening crack split the air. A large branch from the old oak tree in the front yard had snapped, crashing to the ground just feet from the house. Sarah gasped, her blood running cold. The creek was now a raging torrent, its brown water churning with debris. It had already overflowed its banks and was rapidly encroaching on the house. Sarah realized with a sickening lurch that they were in serious danger. This wasn't just a storm, it was a flood. "Walks with Stars," she screamed, her voice laced with panic. "We need to get out of here." He appeared at the doorway, his expression grave. "The barn is still safe," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We can take shelter there." Sarah hesitated. The barn was old, but it was on higher ground. It was their only chance. "Mary, grab the blankets and some food," she instructed, her voice trembling. "We're going to the barn." As they stepped out into the storm, the full force of the wind and rain hit them like a physical blow. The world was a blur of swirling water and howling wind. Sarah struggled to keep her footing, her hand clutching Mary's tightly. Walks with Stars led the way, his strong hand guiding them through the chaos. The barn loomed ahead, a beacon of hope in the swirling darkness. But even as they reached its relative safety, Sarah knew that the fury of the storm was far from over. Against the current, the floodwaters surged, a viscous, coffee-colored nightmare gnawing at the barn's base. Sarah, chilled to the marrow and drenched, fought to control Bess, their family cow, as Walks with Stars expertly steered the animal toward higher ground beyond. Billy, his face ashen but resolute, strained against the rope tethered to a balking sow, its cries swallowed by the tempest's roar. Higher ground past the creek. Walks with Stars bellowed against the gale, dark strands plastered to his weathered face. "We must get them there. It's the only sanctuary." Sarah's pulse quickened. The creek? Already a swollen vein in the land. Yet she trusted Walks with Stars. He possessed an innate understanding of this terrain, a prescience she lacked. "Billy, take the sow onward. I'll assist Walks with Stars with Bess." The trek became a grueling battle against the torrent. Frigid and forceful, the water clawed at their shins, threatening to unbalance them. Sarah faltered, the rope biting into her gloved palms as Bess resisted, her eyes wide with terror. Walks with Stars, his movements lithe and powerful, positioned himself by the cow's head, whispering calming sounds in his native tongue, unintelligible to Sarah, yet undeniably soothing to the beast. He guided the animal onward, his bare feet sure on the treacherous, shifting mud. The creek had transformed into a raging cataract, choked with flotsam, splintered wood, severed fence lines, even a section of the chicken coop. Panic threatened to engulf Sarah, but Walks with Stars remained a monument of composure. "We ford it here," he instructed, indicating a partly submerged log bridging the worst of the deluge. "One at a time. Hold fast." Billy, surprisingly steady, coaxed the sow across first, the animal grunting its displeasure with each precarious step. Then came Bess's turn. Relief washed over Sarah as Walks with Stars placed himself between her and the churning water, a living bulwark against the storm's fury. Together, they urged the cow onto the log, its hooves slipping and sliding on the slick surface. At last, they reached the far bank, breathless and trembling with cold and fatigue. The rise proved to be a meager hummock barely cresting the surrounding waterlogged land, yet sufficient for salvation. Billy had already secured the sow, and the chickens, miraculously spared, huddled together in their sodden coop, dragged to safety. They clustered together, a small haven of life amidst the aquatic chaos. Rain drove down in sheets, obscuring the already fading light. The wind shrieked like a tormented spirit, clawing at their clothes and lashing their faces with wet strands. Sarah drew her children close, her arms a protective shield. Walks with Stars remained slightly removed, his gaze fixed on the swirling maelstrom, his expression inscrutable. The barn, now half submerged, resembled a child's toy adrift in a bathtub. Household items bobbed past, stark reminders of what they stood to lose. Sarah watched, dulled by exhaustion and a creeping despair. All she had strived for, all she had created, was being swept away. But then she glanced at her children, their faces smeared with mud and rain, yet their eyes still held the spark of life. She saw Walks with Stars, his quiet fortitude a wellspring of unexpected strength. And she understood she couldn't succumb. They were alive. They were united. And as long as they possessed that, they could weather anything, even this relentless, pitiless storm. That realization settled within her. A tiny flicker of defiance refusing to be quenched. Rebuilding trust. The receding floodwaters left behind a tapestry of mud and debris. A stark reminder of nature's capricious power. But amidst the devastation, a spirit of resilience began to bloom, fueled by a shared need to rebuild. And surprisingly, at the heart of it was Walks with Stars. The first few days were a blur of exhaustion. Sarah, Billy, and Walks with Stars worked tirelessly to salvage what they could from their own land. But Walks with Stars, with an innate understanding of the terrain, soon turned his attention to their neighbors. He possessed a tracking ability that bordered on the uncanny, able to discern faint hoofprints in the mud and follow trails that others missed entirely. "Lost cattle," he announced one morning, pointing towards a muddy bank where the print of a cloven hoof was barely visible. "Belonged to Mr. Abernathy." Sarah, initially hesitant to impose, knew Abernathy had lost a significant portion of his herd. "Are you sure, Walks with Stars? It could be ours." Walks with Stars simply nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Abernathy's cattle. Older." He set off at a brisk pace, Billy trailing behind, eager to learn. Sarah watched them go, a knot of anxiety loosening in her chest. Letting Walks with Stars interact with the community was a risk, but seeing him use his skills to help eased her worries. It took hours, but they returned late in the afternoon, driving a small group of Abernathy's cattle before them. Abernathy, his face etched with weariness, stared in disbelief. I thought they were gone for good," he stammered, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at Walks with Stars, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and lingering suspicion. "Thank you," he managed, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. Walks with Stars simply inclined his head, his expression unreadable. He didn't need words, his actions spoke volumes. Word of Walks with Stars' tracking prowess spread quickly. Soon others were seeking his help. He found stray chickens, located wandering pigs, and even rescued a milk cow that had become trapped in a muddy ravine. With each act of assistance, the townsfolk's perception of him began to shift, the initial hostility slowly giving way to grudging respect. Beyond tracking, Walks with Stars lent his strength to repairing damaged homes. He worked alongside the men, his movements efficient and precise. He showed them how to reinforce weakened structures using techniques passed down through generations of his people. He taught them how to weave branches to create makeshift walls and how to use mud and straw to seal cracks. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the ravaged landscape, Sarah found Walks with Stars hammering planks onto Mrs. Henderson's porch. Mrs. Henderson, a woman known for her sharp tongue and even sharper judgment, stood nearby, watching him with an uncharacteristic softness in her eyes. As Walks with Stars straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, Mrs. Henderson approached him, holding out a small, freshly baked loaf of bread. The aroma of yeast and warmth filled the air. "It ain't much," she said, her voice raspy, "but it's the best I can offer. You've been a godsend, helping everyone like you have." Walks with Stars hesitated for a moment, then accepted the bread with a gentle nod. He didn't understand her words, but he understood the sentiment behind them. He held the warm loaf carefully, a subtle acknowledgement of her gratitude, a silent bridge being built between two vastly different worlds. Sarah watched the exchange, a wave of emotion washing over her. It wasn't just about rebuilding houses and finding lost livestock, it was about rebuilding trust, brick by painful brick. The flood had washed away more than just homes and belongings, it had washed away some of the prejudice and fear that had poisoned their community. And Walks with Stars, the man she had risked everything to protect, was now helping them heal. But she knew this fragile peace could be shattered easily, and the memory of the flood's destructive power served as a constant reminder of the challenges that still lay ahead. Shadows in the night. The moon, a sliver of bone in the inky sky, cast long, skeletal shadows across the ravaged fields. Sarah, her back aching from a day spent wrestling fallen timbers into a makeshift fence, paused by the barn door. A low, guttural snort from within reminded her that even the animals were jumpy. The flood had scattered more than just belongings, it had shaken the very foundations of their sense of security. It wasn't the wind rustling through the skeletal remains of the corn stalks that prickled the hair on the back of her neck. It was a feeling, a sense of being watched. She scanned the horizon, her gaze sweeping across the muddy expanse towards the shadowed treeline. Nothing moved. Still, she couldn't shake the unease. Later, after tucking a restless Mary and a still coughing Thomas into bed, she found Walks with Stars sitting by the dying embers of the hearth. He wasn't asleep. His dark eyes, usually filled with a quiet contemplation, held a sharper edge. "Something troubles you, Sarah McKinley," he said, his voice a low rumble. She hesitated, reluctant to voice her fears. He had been working tirelessly alongside the other settlers, his knowledge of the land proving invaluable in finding lost livestock and patching damaged homes. His injured legs still favored, but he pushed himself, driven by a sense of obligation she didn't quite understand. I think someone was watching the farm tonight." He didn't dismiss her concern. Instead, he rose, his movements fluid despite his lingering injury. He crossed to the window, peering out into the darkness, his silhouette a stark contrast against the pale moonlight. "Bandits," he said, his voice flat. "The flood has weakened everyone. They will seek easy prey." Sarah's blood ran cold. She had heard whispers, rumors of gangs preying on isolated homesteads, taking what little the settlers had left. The thought of them hurting her children. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Walks with Stars turned, his gaze steady. "We prepare." He moved with a purpose that belied his still healing wounds. From beneath his sleeping furs, he retrieved a long, slender knife, its obsidian blade gleaming in the firelight. He tested its edge with his thumb, his expression grim. "They will come expecting an easy target," he said. "We will show them they are mistaken." He didn't elaborate, but Sarah understood. He would defend them. She watched him move about the cabin, securing the windows, reinforcing the door with a heavy wooden beam. He moved with a quiet efficiency, his movements economical and precise. He then retrieved his bow and a quiver of arrows from their hidden place beneath the floorboards. The bow, crafted from seasoned Osage orangewood, was a testament to his skill. He strung it with practiced ease, the taut string humming a silent song of readiness. "Stay inside," he instructed, his voice firm. "Protect the children. I will handle this." Sarah wanted to argue, to insist on helping, but she knew he was right. Her place was with her children. She watched him take up a position by the front window, his bow drawn, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond. He was a shadow himself, a silent guardian standing between her family and the unknown dangers lurking in the night. The fear hadn't lessened, but a sliver of something else, a fragile hope, flickered within her. They weren't alone. A warrior's heart. The first shot cracked the morning silence like a whip. Walks with Stars, already outside, moved with a speed Sarah hadn't imagined, shoving Caleb behind the water trough and yelling at her to get the girls inside. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Sarah. Bandits. Her nightmare realized. She shoved Eliza and Mary towards the cabin, the younger girl whimpering. Looking back, she saw Walks with Stars facing 3 men on horseback, their faces hidden by bandanas. He held only a long knife, the rising sun glinting off the steel. "Get what you want and leave," Sarah screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the wind. The bandits ignored her. One fired again, the bullet kicking up dust near Walks with Stars' feet. He dodged, agile as a cat, and charged forward. The element of surprise was his weapon. He leaped, pulling the first rider from his horse. A flurry of limbs and guttural cries filling the air. The rider hit the ground with a thud, Walks with Stars' knife already at his throat. The other two bandits dismounted, drawing their own knives. Sarah watched, paralyzed, as Walks with Stars engaged them in a brutal dance of death. He moved with a ferocity that chilled her, a stark contrast to the quiet man who whittled toys for her daughters. This was a warrior, a protector, his face a mask of grim determination. One bandit lunged, slashing at Walks with Stars' arm. He grunted, but didn't falter, spinning away from the blow and countering with a swift jab to the man's abdomen. The bandit staggered back, clutching his wound. The remaining outlaw, taller and broader than the others, roared and charged. He swung his knife in wide, powerful arcs, forcing Walks with Stars to retreat. Sarah could see the strain on his face, the sweat plastering his hair to his forehead. He was tiring. Suddenly, Walks with Stars stumbled, his foot catching on a rock. The big bandit seized the opportunity, his knife aimed for Walks with Stars' chest. Sarah screamed, a primal sound ripped from her throat. But Walks with Stars was faster. He twisted, deflecting the blow with his own blade, but the force of the impact drove him backwards. He landed hard, his breath whooshing out of him. The bandit raised his knife for the killing stroke. Sarah grabbed the rifle leaning against the cabin wall. Her hands shook as she raised it, sighted, and fired. The bandit grunted and clutched his shoulder, dropping his knife. Walks with Stars used the distraction to scramble to his feet. But as he rose, Sarah saw it, a dark stain blooming on his side. He'd been wounded and badly. He swayed, his grip on his knife loosening. The wounded bandit recovered from his initial shock, charged again. Walks with Stars met him, but his movements were slower, weaker. The bandit landed a blow, the knife slicing across Walks with Stars' chest. Walks with Stars roared, a sound of pure rage and defiance. He lunged forward, tackling the bandit to the ground. They grappled, a tangled mess of limbs and blood. Sarah watched, heart pounding in her chest, unable to breathe. Finally, Walks with Stars managed to pin the bandit. He raised his knife, his hand trembling, and plunged it into the bandit's heart. The bandit went still. Walks with Stars pushed himself up, his face pale, his breathing ragged. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with a pain that went beyond his physical wounds. He managed a weak smile, a silent reassurance. Then his knees buckled and he collapsed. Sarah dropped the rifle and ran to him, her heart pounding in her ears. She knelt beside him, cradling his head in her lap. His skin was cold and clammy. The blood flowed freely from his wounds, staining her hands crimson. Walks with Stars, she whispered, her voice choked with fear. Walks with Stars, stay with me. She pressed her hand against his chest, trying to stem the bleeding. As she did, she realized something profound, something that had been growing within her, unnoticed, like a seedling pushing through the earth. It wasn't just gratitude she felt for this man, nor was it merely respect. It was something deeper, something more. She loved him. A bridge of hope. Consciousness returned in agonizing increments, each inhalation a victory hard won. Walks with Stars recalled the blade's bite, the spreading crimson stain, Sarah's terrified expression. Then, oblivion. They must have found him. For months, he'd convalesced in a secluded encampment cradled within the Wichita Mountains, his body slowly knitting itself back together even as Sarah's haunted image and the phantom warmth of her hand tormented his waking hours. The jagged scar bisecting his chest served as a constant, tactile reminder, a brand of sacrifice for those he held dear. The ride to Sarah's farm felt simultaneously protracted and fleeting. He guided the small band of Comanche warriors, their countenances impassive, their gazes reflecting a tentative optimism. A fragile accord lay before them. A span he prayed would bear their weight. Reaching the crest, the farm unfolded below. Emerald fields attested to Sarah's diligence. Billy's joyous shouts echoed as he pursued errant chickens. Mary's careful ministrations to her fledgling vegetable garden painted a scene of pastoral tranquility. And then Sarah, poised on the porch, her hand shading her brow, her features slowly shifting from disbelief into an emotion he struggled to define: anticipation, apprehension, relief. He spurred his mount onward, his comrades following suit. Dust devils danced around them as they approached, the only sound the steady cadence of hooves. He dismounted, his gaze locked on Sarah. "Walks with stars," she breathed, her voice a mere breath itself. She edged forward, then again, until only a few feet separated them. He noted the etched lines of worry around her eyes, the tremor in her hands. He yearned to reach for her, to offer solace, but hesitated, unsure of his welcome. He indicated the warriors behind him. "I come in amity, Sarah McKinley, with words from my people. They seek an end to conflict, a pathway to understanding." One of the warriors, his face a roadmap of time and hardship, stepped forward. He spoke in Comanche, his words carrying the weight of authority. "Walks with stars" translated. "He is called Black Kettle, esteemed among our people. He proposes a compact, a sharing of this land, coexistence without dread." Sarah absorbed his words, her gaze darting between "Walks with stars" and "Black Kettle," weighing each syllable. Finally, a nod. I will listen," she stated, her voice regaining strength. "For my children, for this community, I'm willing to try." The treaty was formalized beneath the venerable oak where Walks with Stars had nearly breathed his last. Now it embodied rebirth, promise, a new dawn. The air crackled with unease, burdened by the legacy of strife. Black Kettle spoke first, his tone infused with quiet nobility. He spoke of the earth, the buffalo's decline, the necessity of mutual respect. Sarah followed, her words unadorned yet deeply felt. She recounted her struggles, her aspirations for her children, her longing for a future untouched by violence. The agreement was sealed with berry-stained signatures and a handshake, a tenuous vow carried on the breeze. A mere beginning, a solitary advance on a challenging road, but progress nonetheless. As the Comanche prepared to depart, Walks with Stars tarried. He turned to Sarah, his heart drumming a frantic rhythm. "I have longed for you," he confessed, his voice barely audible. Sarah's gaze softened, a subtle smile gracing her lips. "We missed you too." Billy and Mary raced toward him, their faces alight with joy. "Walks with Stars. You've come back." They swarmed him, their small arms encircling his legs. Kneeling, he embraced them tightly. Sarah approached, her hand gently caressing his cheek. "Welcome home," she murmured. He gazed at her, at Billy, at Mary. He saw the hope blazing in their eyes, the affection radiating from their hearts. He knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. Yet he stood ready, prepared to forge a new existence, one characterized by peace, empathy, and love, ready to erect a bridge of hope.